The rain had been falling since early afternoon, the kind that soaked into the bones and turned the city into a blur of gray reflections. When Alexander Crowe stepped out of his black luxury car in front of one of the most expensive restaurants in the capital. To the outside world, he looked exactly as he always did. Tall, perfectly dressed, composed, a self-made millionaire whose name carried weight in finance, politics, and media. Cameras had followed him for years. Magazines had praised his discipline and cold intelligence, and rivals whispered that he had no heart at all. Tonight was supposed to be routine, a private dinner with potential investors, another deal, another victory. Yet the moment his polished shoes touched the wet pavement, an unfamiliar heaviness settled in his chest, as if the rain had found its way inside him. As he walked toward the glass entrance, the sounds of traffic and distant sirens mixed with the murmur of the city, and that was when he heard it. A small, fragile voice, barely louder than the rain, but sharp enough to stop him mid-step. "Dad, may I eat with you?" The word struck him so hard that for a second he couldn't breathe. He turned slowly, almost afraid of what he might see, and his eyes landed on a little girl standing beneath the restaurant's awning. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her hair was dark, wet, and tangled, her face pale from cold, and her thin body was wrapped in an oversized jacket that clearly belonged to someone else. Her shoes were worn through at the soles, and her hands were red from the cold, clasped tightly together as if holding onto the last bit of courage she had. She looked at him not with fear, but with quiet hope. For a moment, Alexander was certain he had imagined it, that stress or exhaustion had finally pushed his mind too far. "You must be mistaken," he said automatically, his voice calm, distant, trained to show nothing. "I'm not your father." The girl didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply looked up at him and said, "I know, but you look like my dad. And dads eat with their children." The simplicity of her words shattered something deep inside him. The restaurant doors opened behind him, releasing warm light and laughter, and the manager hurried over, already frowning at the sight of the child. "Sir, we'll take care of this," the man said quickly, reaching for the girl's arm. Without understanding why, Alexander raised his hand. "Don't," he said, his voice firmer than he intended. The manager froze, confused. Alexander looked back at the girl. Up close, her eyes were even bigger than he'd thought. Dark, searching, painfully honest. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself with the softness in his tone. "Lily," she replied. "I was just watching people eat. Then I saw you." His throat tightened. He had been called many things in his life: boss, monster, genius, but never dad. Not once since his own childhood, when that word had still meant safety and warmth. He glanced at the restaurant again, at the investors waiting inside, then back at Lily. Something in him shifted, quietly but irreversibly. "Come inside," he said. Lily hesitated, as if afraid the invitation might disappear if she moved too quickly, then took a small step forward. The restaurant fell silent as they entered together, the contrast impossible to ignore, the richest man in the room walking beside a homeless child. They sat at a table near the window. Lily stared at the white tablecloth, the silverware, the soft candlelight, her eyes wide with wonder. When the waiter arrived, Alexander ordered without looking at prices, but this time his hands trembled slightly as he set the menu down. When the food came, Lily didn't touch it. She looked at him and asked, "May I?" He nodded, unable to speak. She ate slowly, carefully, savoring every bite as if afraid it might be taken away. Alexander watched her, feeling a strange ache spread through his chest. "Do you come here often?" he asked quietly. Lily shook her head. "Only when it rains. People stop more when it rains." The words cut deeper than any insult ever had. "Where is your mother?" he asked, already fearing the answer. Lily lowered her eyes. "She got sick. She told me to wait for my dad. Then she went to sleep and didn't wake up." The room seemed to tilt. Alexander felt heat rise behind his eyes, panic and grief tangled together. He turned away, pretending to check his phone, but a tear slipped free and fell onto the table. No one had ever made him cry. Not losses, not betrayals, not years of loneliness. Yet this child, with one simple question, had undone him. When the meal ended, Lily smiled up at him, a real smile this time. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time in decades, Alexander Crow did not correct her. The rain had eased into a thin mist by the time Alexander and Lily stepped back onto the street, the city lights shimmering like broken stars on the wet pavement. And for a moment Alexander assumed this was where their paths would separate, that she would thank him and disappear into the night like every uncomfortable reminder of a world he usually paid to forget. But Lily didn't walk away. She stood beside him, clutching the edge of his coat as if it were an anchor, and looked up with an expression that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. "Do you have to go now, Dad?" she asked softly. The word no longer shocked him. Instead, it settled somewhere deep in his chest, heavy and warm at the same time. He inhaled slowly and asked a question he had never once asked any stranger in his life. "Where do you sleep?" Lily pointed down the street toward a narrow alley wedged between two abandoned buildings, where cardboard sheets and torn plastic formed a fragile shelter against the cold. The sight filled him with a sudden, violent anger, sharp and unfamiliar, not at the city or the world, but at himself, though he couldn't yet explain why. Without another word, he guided Lily toward his waiting car. She froze when she saw it, clearly unsure if she was allowed to step inside. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You're safe." The driver glanced at Alexander in the rearview mirror, surprised but wise enough not to ask questions. As the car pulled away, Lily pressed her face to the window, watching the city pass by as if she had entered another universe. Alexander gave directions to one of his private hotel residences, a place he rarely used, more a symbol of success than a home. Inside the suite, Lily gasped softly. The room was warm, bright, and silent, with thick carpets and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. She walked carefully, touching the sofa, the curtains, the bed, as if afraid everything might vanish if she moved too quickly. Alexander ordered food again, clean clothes, and a warm bath, issuing instructions with the same authority he used in boardrooms. Yet every command carried a different weight now. When Lily emerged wrapped in a soft robe, her hair clean and slightly curled at the ends, she looked like a completely different child, and the sight stirred something painful in him. As she ate again, more confidently this time, he watched her with an intensity that surprised him. "What was your mom's name?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "Emily," Lily replied without hesitation. The name hit him like a blow. His fingers tightened around the glass in his hand. Memories he had buried for years surged forward. Emily's laugh, her stubborn kindness, the way she used to touch his arm when she wanted him to listen. "Where did you live?" he asked. Lily named a neighborhood, then a street, then an apartment building he knew too well. His heart began to pound. He excused himself, walking into the bathroom and gripping the sink as his reflection stared back at him, pale and shaken. He had accused Emily of lying when she told him she was pregnant. A rushed test, a doctor he trusted, a result he never questioned. He had chosen pride over patience, control over compassion, and walked away, convinced that cutting emotional ties was strength. Back in the room, Lily was curled up on the couch, her eyelids heavy. "Can I stay here tonight?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he answered immediately, without calculation. She smiled and fell asleep within minutes. Her small body finally relaxed. Alexander sat in the armchair across from her and watched her breathe, every rise and fall of her chest tightening the knot in his throat. He didn't sleep. Instead, he stared out at the city until dawn, replaying every decision that had led him here, every call he hadn't returned, every doubt he had silenced. The next morning, he took Lily to breakfast, then to a clinic he owned shares in but had never visited. The tests were quick, efficient, clinical, everything he usually valued. He paced the hallway like a man waiting for a verdict, his mind torn between terror and hope. When the doctor finally spoke, confirming what his heart already knew, Alexander felt his knees weaken. He thanked the staff, signed whatever papers were placed in front of him, and walked out into the sunlight with Lily holding his hand. "Why are you shaking?" she asked, looking up at him. He knelt in front of her, his eyes wet, his voice breaking. "Because I should have found you sooner," he said. Lily touched his cheek gently, as if comforting him instead. "You found me now," she said simply. In that moment, Alexander understood that all his wealth, all his power, had never once prepared him for the weight of responsibility and love settling into his life. And he welcomed it, terrified and grateful all at once. Morning sunlight filled the apartment with a softness Alexander had never allowed into his life before, and he stood in the doorway of Lily's room watching her sleep, her small hand curled around the edge of the blanket, as if still afraid the warmth might disappear. For years he had woken to silence, to schedules and notifications and assistants reminding him who he was supposed to be, but now the quiet felt different, alive, fragile, sacred. When Lily finally opened her eyes and smiled at him, calling him Dad, without hesitation, something inside him settled into place, as though a missing piece had finally returned home. The days that followed unfolded slowly, awkwardly, beautifully. Alexander canceled meetings without explanation, ignored calls he would once have taken even in his sleep, and learned how to pack a lunch, how to tie shoelaces, how to listen without trying to fix everything. He enrolled Lily in a nearby school, insisting on anonymity, and walked her there himself every morning, feeling the strange weight of curious glances and whispered questions, none of which mattered. He learned that she loved drawing houses with big windows and gardens full of flowers, that loud thunder made her flinch, that she talked to her mother at night as if she were still nearby. Each discovery cut him and healed him at the same time. One evening, as they sat on a park bench sharing ice cream, Lily looked up at him with sudden seriousness. "Are you going to disappear like before?" she asked. The question shattered him. He knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes, and felt the full force of his past crash down on him. The pride that had blinded him, the fear that had made him cruel, the silence that had cost him years he could never get back. "No," he said hoarsely. "I promise you. I'm here. Always." Lily studied his face for a long moment, then nodded, accepting his promise with a trust he knew he had to earn every day. Weeks later, they stood together at Emily's grave, the wind gentle, the sky clear. Lily placed flowers carefully on the stone and whispered something only she and her mother would ever know. Alexander stood beside her, tears streaming freely now, no longer hidden or restrained. "I'm sorry," he murmured, not knowing if the words were meant for Emily, for Lily, or for the man he used to be. In that moment, he understood that success without love was just another form of poverty. Time passed, and Alexander's world continued to change in ways he never could have planned. He sold properties he no longer needed, closed deals that didn't align with the life he was building, and began funding shelters and schools quietly, without press releases or applause. At night, he read Lily's stories, his voice unsteady at first, then stronger, filled with warmth. Sometimes she would fall asleep halfway through, her head resting against his arm, and he would sit there long after, afraid to move, overwhelmed by gratitude and regret tangled together. One night, as he tucked her in, Lily smiled sleepily and said, "I'm glad I asked you to eat with me." Alexander felt his chest tighten, tears blurring his vision. "So am I," he whispered. He knew then that a single moment, a hungry child's courage, a simple question spoken in the rain, had rewritten his entire life. He was still a millionaire, still powerful in the eyes of the world, but none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the small hand in his, the laughter echoing through rooms once empty, the second chance he would protect with everything he had. And as Lily drifted into sleep, safe and loved, Alexander understood that becoming her father had saved him just as surely as he had saved her.